My son charged me $3,000 a month in rent. I was working 3 jobs while he and my daughter-in-law. I signed my name 3 times. Each signature felt like giving away another piece of myself. But where else could I go? At 72, with limited savings left after helping with their renovations, I needed this roof over my head. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they've been planning your downfall? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I never thought I'd see the day when my own child would treat me like a tenant instead of a mother. After my husband passed in Ohio, I sold our small home and moved in with my son in Michigan, believing his promise that I'd be safe with family. Instead, he handed me a typed lease, $3,000 a month in rent, signed like I was just another stranger. While he and his wife lounged in the new kitchen I helped pay for, I was dragging myself through 3 different jobs, nights at a grocery store, mornings cleaning offices, and weekends caring for another family's elderly mother, just to cover the rent for a bedroom in my son's house. And every month, the silence at dinner grew louder, until even the clinking of silverware felt like judgment. But everything changed the day I found a box buried under winter coats in the attic, a folder with closing documents from the sale of my old house, contracts I was told were already filed. Hidden in the margins were my initials on papers I never remembered signing, and even stranger, the dates didn't match the timeline of the sale. That's when I realized my son and his wife hadn't just been charging me rent, they had quietly taken full control of my money, my house, and even my future. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to steal from the person who raised them, this story will shake you to your core. Follow along as we uncover a betrayal that's been hiding in plain sight for months. The lease had my signature, but I'd never held that pen. My son slid it across the kitchen table like he was doing me a favor, $3,000 a month to live in what used to feel like home. Mom, it's just paperwork, Danny said, tapping the document with his finger. Makes everything official. Protects us both. I stared at the crisp white paper. Security deposit, $1,500. Late fee, $200 after the 5th. Eviction clause, 30 days notice. The words blurred together like they were written in a foreign language. This was my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep, driven to baseball practice, helped through college. Now he was my landlord. The coffee in my mug had gone cold while I read. The kitchen tiles felt ice cold under my bare feet. Everything in this room was new: granite counters, stainless steel appliances, custom cabinets. Everything I'd helped pay for when I gave them my house money 6 months ago. They'd called it helping with renovations. $3,000 seemed steep, I managed to say. Lisa, my daughter-in-law, looked up from her laptop. That's market rate, Mom. Actually, we're giving you a family discount. Similar rooms in senior communities cost $4,000. Senior communities. Like I was some stranger they'd picked up off the street. Danny cleared his throat. The lease is month to month. Very flexible. And look, he pointed to a line near the bottom. We included utilities and basic cable. How generous. Utilities in the house I'd helped buy. I signed my name 3 times. Each signature felt like giving away another piece of myself. But where else could I go? At 72, with limited savings left after helping with their renovations, I needed this roof over my head. Welcome home, tenant, Lisa said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. If your own family betrayed you like this, you'd want someone watching your back. Subscribe, don't face this alone. As I handed back the pen, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. At the bottom of the lease, in small print, was a date, February 15th. But today was February 28th. This lease had been prepared 2 weeks ago, before we'd even discussed me paying rent. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they'd been planning your downfall? Comment family first if you think blood should mean more than business. That night, lying in my rented bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a source of income. The heating vent rattled above my head, a sound I'd never noticed before. Now it sounded like counting. Like a cash register. As I signed my name for the third time that month, I noticed something else. Initials on documents I'd never seen before, dated weeks before I even moved in. I counted quarters at 2 a.m., sitting on my rented bed, calculating whether I could afford both rent and groceries this month. $73 in coins. 2 crumpled 20s. One $10 bill that had been through the washing machine. Not enough. Never enough. The alarm would ring in 3 hours for my morning shift at Peterson's office complex, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, wiping down conference tables where people made more in an hour than I made in a week. Then a quick nap before my evening shift at Miller's Grocery, stocking shelves while teenagers half my age supervised me. Weekends belonged to Mrs. Henderson, an 85-year-old woman whose family paid me to sit with her, help her with medications, and make sure she didn't fall. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I was caring for someone else's elderly mother because my own son saw me as nothing more than a monthly payment. My knees ached from the office cleaning. My back screamed from lifting grocery boxes. My hands were permanently rough from industrial cleaning supplies. But every evening, I'd sit at Danny's kitchen table, my landlord's kitchen table, and count out exact change for next month's rent. $3,000. Every month. While they enjoyed their new leather furniture and weekend trips to wine country. "How was work, Mom?" Danny would ask sometimes, barely looking up from his phone. Work. Like I was some career woman instead of a 72-year-old scrambling to pay my own child for a roof over my head. Lisa would smile from the couch, curled up in her new cashmere throw. "Must be nice to stay busy. Keeps you young. Working 3 jobs to pay your own child?" If this feels familiar, subscribe. You're not fighting this battle alone. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It wasn't even the humiliation of handing over rent money to my son every first of the month. The worst part was dinner time, sitting at their table, eating microwaved leftovers while they discussed vacation plans funded by money I'd given them. "We're thinking Cabo in March," Lisa announced one Tuesday evening. "Danny needs the break. Work has been so stressful." Danny worked part-time at his friend's car dealership. I knew because I'd helped him get the job by lending him money for work clothes. Money I'd never seen returned. "That sounds lovely," I said, cutting my reheated chicken into smaller pieces. My teeth weren't what they used to be, but dental work wasn't in the budget. "Maybe next year you can join us," Danny offered. "Once you get more settled." Settled. Code 4, once you've paid us enough rent to fund our lifestyle. What would you do if you had to work 3 jobs just to afford a room in your own child's house? Drop your answer below. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Wednesday morning, while cleaning another family's office, I overheard a phone conversation that made my blood freeze. The old lady's got 3 months of back payments saved up. Perfect timing. The box was buried under winter coats like a secret they hoped I'd never find. Inside, contracts with my signature, dates that didn't match, and a timeline that made no sense. I'd gone up to the attic looking for Christmas decorations. February was almost over, but I wanted something cheerful for my small room. Instead, I found evidence that my life had been stolen with paperwork and precision. The box was cardboard, unmarked, shoved behind a plastic container of Halloween costumes. When I opened it, the smell of important documents hit me, that clean, administrative scent of papers that change lives. On top, the closing documents from my Ohio house sale. I remembered signing these, remembered the relief of getting enough money to help Danny and Lisa with their renovations. But the copies in this box looked different. Cleaner. Like someone had made fresh photocopies and highlighted certain sections. My signature was there, but it looked wrong. The loops in my letters were too perfect, too steady. I'd signed those papers in the lawyer's office, hands shaking from grief and stress. This signature looked like someone had traced it carefully. Underneath the closing papers, a folder labeled Transfer Documents. I'd never seen this folder before. Inside were bank routing forms, investment account changes, and insurance beneficiary updates. All dated 3 weeks before my husband's funeral. All bearing my signature. But 3 weeks before the funeral, I was in the hospital with pneumonia. I couldn't have signed anything. One hidden box can change everything. Subscribe so you never miss the warning signs that could save your future. The final document made my hands shake for real. A power of attorney form, granting Danny full control over my finances, in case of mental incapacity or physical inability to manage affairs. Signed and notarized on a Tuesday in January. I was cleaning offices that Tuesday. I had the time sheets to prove it. In the margin, handwritten notes in Danny's careful script. Mom doesn't need to see transfer schedules. Handle quietly through Lisa's cousin at the bank. Lisa's cousin. I'd met him once at a family barbecue. Quiet guy who worked in estate planning. They'd introduced him as someone who helped families manage their finances. Now I understood what kind of help he provided. My chest felt tight. The attic air seemed thinner. I was holding proof that my son and daughter-in-law had been forging my signature, stealing my money, and planning my financial dependence months before I'd even moved in with them. The rent wasn't just exploitation. It was the final step in a plan to drain every penny I had. What would you do if you found proof your own family had been forging your signature? Pause and think, because your answer might save someone else. My initials were on papers I'd never signed, dated 2 weeks before I even knew about the house sale. In the margin, my son's handwriting. Handle the transfer quietly, she won't check. Margaret didn't look up from the documents when she said, "Honey, this isn't family business anymore. This is fraud." I'd knocked on Margaret's door at 7 a.m., clutching the box of papers like evidence in a murder trial. She'd been my neighbor for 6 months, the kind of quiet woman who brought soup when you were sick and never asked nosy questions. I hadn't known she was a retired real estate attorney until that moment. "Sit down," she said, clearing her kitchen table. "Let me see everything." Margaret worked like a detective. She spread the documents in chronological order, used a magnifying glass to examine signatures, and cross-referenced dates with a small calendar. Her movements were precise, professional, calm. "This power of attorney," she said, pointing to the notary seal. "See how the date stamp is smudged? That's not accidental. Someone backdated this document." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. "Your signature on the closing documents, see how it tilts left? But on these bank transfers, it tilts right. Unless you're ambidextrous, someone else signed these." I wasn't ambidextrous. I could barely write legibly with my dominant hand anymore. "Here's what they did," Margaret continued, drawing a timeline. "They got access to your signature from legitimate documents, probably the house sale paperwork. Then they practiced forging it on these financial transfers. The power of attorney gave them legal cover if anyone questioned the transactions." My coffee cup rattled against the saucer. I hadn't realized my hands were shaking. "Margaret, what do I do?" She looked at me over her reading glasses. "First, we document everything. Photos, copies, timeline. Second, we freeze your remaining accounts before they clean those out too. Third, we call the police." The police. Against my own son. Without expert help, victims stay victims. Subscribe, knowledge like this could protect your family's future. "I know it's hard," Margaret said, her voice gentler. "But this isn't about family anymore. This is about a crime in progress. They've stolen your house money, forged legal documents, and turned you into their personal ATM machine." She handed me a tissue I didn't realize I needed. "How much money are we talking about?" I thought about the house sale, my late husband's life insurance, my small retirement account. Maybe 200,000. Maybe more. Margaret's expression darkened. "That's felony territory. This isn't petty theft. It's systematic financial abuse of an elderly person." Elderly person. I still thought of myself as just me. But to the law, I was a protected class. My age made their crime worse, not better. We start with the bank, Margaret said, making a list. Get records of every transaction. Then we call Adult Protective Services. They handle financial abuse cases. Have you ever needed an expert to confirm what your gut already knew? Sometimes the hardest part is admitting you need help. Margaret circled 3 dates in red ink. These signatures happened while you were still in Ohio. Either you teleported, or someone's been very busy with your identity. The bank representative went quiet when I asked about the calls. Ma'am, we show multiple authorizations in your voice, but the number doesn't match your current phone. Margaret had driven me to First National Bank that morning, armed with a folder of questions and my identification. The customer service rep, a young woman named Jessica, pulled up my account history on her computer screen. Here's what's strange, Jessica said, squinting at her monitor. We have recorded phone calls authorizing major account changes. The voice verification system confirmed it was you. But the calls came from a number ending in 4-7-8-2. My phone number ended in 3-9-1-5. Always had. Can you play the recordings? Margaret asked. Jessica hesitated. That's not usual procedure, but given the circumstances. She clicked a few buttons and turned up her speakers. My own voice filled the small office space. Yes, I'd like to transfer my entire savings account to the joint checking account. Account number 4478921. I'd never made that call. But it was definitely my voice. When was this recorded? I whispered. October 15th, 2:30 p.m., Jessica said. You authorized moving $47,000. October 15th. I was at Peterson's office complex, mopping the executive floor. I had my time card to prove it. Play the next one, Margaret said. Another recording. I need to add my son Daniel as a joint account holder with full access. For emergencies, you understand. Again, my voice. Again, words I'd never spoken. They stole her voice to steal her money. Subscribe. Learn how financial predators operate before they target you. How many calls are there? Margaret asked. Jessica scrolled through the records. 14 calls over 6 months. The last one was, yesterday. Yesterday. While I was sleeping in my rented bedroom, someone had called the bank using my voice to authorize God knows what. What did yesterday's call authorize? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Closure of your CD account. Early withdrawal penalty waived due to hardship circumstances. My certificate of deposit. My emergency fund. The last $20,000 I had left in the world. Margaret leaned forward. We need copies of all these call records, the phone numbers they came from, and the exact timestamps. Ma'am, I should mention, Jessica said carefully, the voice verification system is quite sophisticated. It analyzes speech patterns, breathing, even background noise. For it to approve these calls, the voice match would have had to be nearly perfect. Nearly perfect. Like someone had been practicing. The phone calls came from Danny and Lisa's house. I recognized the number now, their landline, the one they'd installed for better internet connection. The one Lisa used for her work-from-home calls. Check your phone records right now. Do you recognize every number that's made calls on your behalf? This could be happening to you. There's one more thing, Jessica said, her voice dropping. The final call lasted 18 minutes. According to the transcript, you authorized complete account closure and fund transfer. The recording shows you were emotional. Crying. I hadn't cried on any phone call. But someone had, using my stolen voice. The final call lasted 18 minutes. According to the transcript, I authorized the transfer of my entire retirement fund. I was in surgery that day. This case has legs, the attorney said, but her expression was grim. Family fraud is the hardest to prove and the most painful to pursue. Margaret had recommended Sarah Chen, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. Her office was small but organized, with certificates on the walls and stacks of case files that suggested she stayed busy. "Let me understand the scope," Sarah said, reviewing our evidence folder. Forged signatures on financial documents, voice impersonation for bank authorizations, fraudulent power of attorney, and systematic theft of approximately $200,000. It sounded even worse when said out loud. "The good news is you have excellent documentation. These signature comparisons are textbook forgery." The phone record timestamps create a clear timeline. The voice analysis from the bank will be crucial. She pulled out a yellow legal pad. "The challenging part is that your son and daughter-in-law were sophisticated about this. They created plausible cover stories, helping with renovations, managing your finances during grief, providing housing. So they won't face charges?" "Oh, they'll face charges," Sarah said firmly. "Elder financial abuse is a felony in Michigan. With this amount of money involved, we're looking at multiple felony counts. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next." "What comes next?" "The destruction of my family. The public humiliation. The realization that the son I raised had planned my poverty with spreadsheet precision." "What are my options?" I asked. Sarah opened a thick folder. "Civil court to recover your money. Criminal charges through the prosecutor's office. Adult Protective Services investigation. And immediately, we need to freeze any remaining accounts and file for emergency protective orders. Legal protection doesn't happen overnight. Subscribe, get the early warnings that prevent years of financial damage." "How long will this take?" "Civil recovery could take 2 years. Criminal prosecution moves faster, maybe 8 months to trial. But first, we file emergency motions to freeze their assets and prevent further theft." She handed me a stack of papers. "I need you to sign authorizations for bank records, phone company subpoenas, and forensic accounting. We're going to trace every penny." My hands shook as I signed. Each signature felt like signing my son's arrest warrant. "Sarah, what if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation?" She looked at me with kind eyes. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years. Legitimate family financial help doesn't require forged signatures and voice impersonation. What happened to you was a crime. A crime. Not a misunderstanding. Not a family dispute. A calculated, systematic crime." "One more thing," Sarah said. "Once we file these motions, there's no going back quietly. Your son and daughter-in-law will know you're fighting back. They might escalate before we can stop them." Escalate. I thought about the $3,000 in monthly rent. The jobs that were breaking my body. The conversations I'd overheard about perfect timing. What kind of escalation? Sarah's expression darkened. "In my experience, they'll try to have you declared mentally incompetent. Would you take your own child to court over money? Sometimes the hardest choices are the only ones left. The restraining order would freeze all accounts by Friday. But first, we needed to serve papers, and my son had no idea what was coming. I practiced the words in my bathroom mirror, 'I know what you did to my house money.' But when I saw him in his new leather jacket, my voice caught. Sarah had advised against confronting them before the legal papers were served. 'Let the courts handle it,' she'd said. But this was still my son. Despite everything, he was still the boy who'd brought me dandelions and called them flowers. The leather jacket was expensive, Italian leather, the kind Danny had always admired but could never afford on his part-time car sales salary. Now he could afford it. With my money. "Hey, Mom," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Rent's due tomorrow. You got it ready?" Rent. $3,000 that would clean out my checking account. Money I'd earned scrubbing other people's floors and stocking their shelves. "Actually, Danny, I wanted to talk to you about the rent." Lisa looked up from her laptop. "What about it?" "The lease is clear, first of the month, every month." I sat down at the kitchen table where I'd signed that lease weeks ago. The granite surface was cold under my palms. In my pocket, I carried copies of the forged documents, the phone records, the bank authorizations. Evidence that my son was a criminal. I'd been going through some old paperwork. I began carefully. Found some documents I don't remember signing. Danny's thumb stopped scrolling. What kind of documents? Bank transfers. Power of attorney forms. Things dated when I was in Ohio. The silence in the room changed quality. Before, it had been casual indifference. Now it was charged, dangerous. Lisa closed her laptop with a sharp click. Mom, you've been under a lot of stress. Sometimes elderly people don't. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Don't blame my age for your crime. Danny finally looked at me. Really looked. His expression wasn't surprise or confusion. It was calculation. Mom, I think you're confused. Why don't you go rest? We'll talk about this later. Confronting family about fraud takes courage most people don't have. Subscribe, you might need this strength someday. I'm not confused about forged signatures. I'm not confused about phone calls I never made. And I'm definitely not confused about the voice recordings at First National Bank. Lisa went white. You went to the bank? I went to the bank. I went to a lawyer. I went to the police. The lie came out smoothly. We hadn't gone to the police yet, but they didn't know that. Danny stood up slowly. Mom, you need to be very careful about making accusations. Is that a threat? It's advice. False accusations can have serious consequences. What would you say to someone who stole your life savings while calling you Mom? Write it in the comments, because some words need to be said. I pulled the folder from my purse and set it on the table. These aren't accusations. They're evidence. When I walked into the living room with my folder of evidence, his wife was on the phone saying, "She's getting suspicious. We need to accelerate the timeline." The folder hit the kitchen table with a slap. My son looked at the papers, then at me, and said the three words that changed everything: "Prove we're wrong." I spread the documents like a poker hand. Forged signatures. Bank records. Phone transcripts. Timeline comparisons. 6 months of evidence that my son and daughter-in-law had stolen my life savings while charging me rent to live in their house. This signature, I said, pointing to the power of attorney form. You signed my name on October 3rd. I was in Ohio that day, at your father's grave marker unveiling. Danny barely glanced at the paper. People make mistakes with dates. This phone call, I continued, sliding the bank transcript across the table. October 15th, 2:30 p.m. I authorized transferring $47,000 to your joint account. I was mopping floors at Peterson's office complex. I have the time cards to prove it. Lisa leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Voice recognition technology isn't perfect. Banks make errors. 14 errors? Over 6 months? All moving money from my accounts to yours? The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. The new appliances, the granite counters, the custom cabinets. All paid for with money stolen from me while I worked 3 jobs to afford a bedroom in this house. Danny finally looked at the evidence. Really looked. He picked up the power of attorney form, examined his handwriting in the margins, read the dates that didn't match. Okay, he said quietly. So what? So what? Not denial. Not explanation. Just, so what? When family becomes the enemy, you need allies. Subscribe, no one should face betrayal alone. So what? My voice rose. You forged my signature. You stole my house money. You've been charging me rent to live in a house I helped buy while you drained my bank accounts behind my back. Lisa stood up, smoothing her sweater. We needed that money more than you did. You're old. What were you going to do with $200,000? Buy a sports car? The calculation in her voice was breathtaking. No shame. No regret. Just cold math. That money was my security. My future. My independence. Your independence? Danny laughed. Mom, you can barely take care of yourself. You work 3 jobs because you're too proud to accept help. We were helping you. By stealing from me? By managing your finances before you lost everything to some scammer or bad investment. We kept your money safe. Safe. In their accounts. Funding their lifestyle while I counted quarters at midnight. The voice recordings. Lisa's good with voices, Danny interrupted. Always has been. Could imitate teachers in high school, friends on the phone. She practiced yours for weeks. Practiced. Like stealing my voice was a hobby project. Lisa shrugged. We had bills. The house needed work. You had money sitting in accounts earning nothing. It wasn't your money. They stole her future to fund their present. What's the worst financial betrayal you've ever experienced? Share below. Someone needs to hear they're not alone. His wife finally spoke. We needed the money more than you did. You were going to lose it all anyway in a nursing home. The calculation in her voice was breathtaking. Word travels fast in suburban Michigan. By Thursday, 3 neighbors had left casseroles and 2 had offered spare bedrooms. The shame wasn't mine to carry anymore. I hadn't planned to tell anyone. But when Margaret knocked on my door Friday morning with coffee and legal papers to review, Mrs. Patterson from next door was walking her dog and asked how I was holding up. Holding up from what? She'd asked with genuine concern. Margaret looked at me. I nodded. Her son and daughter-in-law have been stealing her money, Margaret said simply. She's taking them to court. By evening, my phone was ringing. Carol from down the street, I'm making extra chili. You shouldn't have to cook while dealing with this. Bob from across the road, got a spare room if you need somewhere to stay during the legal stuff. Even quiet Mr. Henderson knocked with a plate of his wife's famous cookies. Nobody seemed shocked. That was the strangest part. Happens more than you'd think, Carol said, setting the chili container on my counter. My sister went through something similar with her oldest boy. Family fraud is an epidemic. Family fraud. Such clinical words for such personal devastation. How did your sister handle it? I asked. Took him to court. Got most of her money back. Didn't speak to him for 3 years. Carol's expression softened. But they're talking now. Sometimes legal consequences teach people boundaries they should have learned as children. Community support can save lives. Subscribe, learn how to build the network you might someday need. The casseroles weren't just food, they were statements. Each covered dish said, "We believe you. We support you. You're not alone." In a neighborhood where people usually kept to themselves, my crisis had created an army of allies. Danny and Lisa noticed. How could they not? Their driveway stayed empty while mine filled with visitors. Their mailbox held only bills while mine overflowed with cards and notes of support. Wednesday evening, I watched from my window as Lisa approached Carol in her front yard. They talked for several minutes, Lisa gesturing toward my house, her voice rising. Carol listened politely, nodded once, and walked away without responding. Later, Carol called. She tried to tell me you were having memory problems. That you were confused about financial matters and making wild accusations. Memory problems. The classic defense for family financial abuse. Blame the victim's age, question their mental capacity, suggest they're confused and paranoid. What did you tell her? I told her that confused people don't usually have lawyers and organized evidence files. Carol's voice carried satisfaction. I also mentioned that confused people don't typically work 3 jobs to pay rent to their own children. When family fails, neighbors step up. Who in your community would bring you casseroles during the worst time of your life? Tag them below. The social isolation was working both ways now. Danny and Lisa had isolated me for months, making me feel ashamed of my financial struggles. Now the community had isolated them, making their crime visible to everyone on the block. Margaret knocked with news. I made some calls. Your son's been trying this with 3 other elderly parents in neighboring counties. You're not his first victim. 3 families. Same story. Same timeline. My son and his wife had turned elder fraud into a business model. Margaret spread photographs across her dining room table. Driver's licenses, house sale documents, bank records. 3 elderly people who looked like they could be my siblings, all wearing the same expression of bewildered betrayal. This is Robert Chin, Margaret said, pointing to a man about my age. Lost $150,000 to his daughter and her boyfriend. Same method, forged power of attorney, voice impersonation, systematic account drainage. Robert's story was almost identical to mine. Recently widowed, sold his family home, moved in with adult children who promised security and ended up charging him rent while stealing his nest egg. Here's Dorothy Williams, Margaret continued. Grandson and his wife convinced her to help with their mortgage after her husband died. She discovered they'd been using her social security number to open credit cards and take out loans in her name. Dorothy was 81. Her grandson had destroyed her credit rating while convincing her she was helping the family. The third case is Patricia Moore. Her son moved her from Florida to Michigan, supposedly for better family support. Instead, he sold her condo without permission and kept the proceeds. Patterns hide in plain sight until someone connects the dots. Subscribe, recognize the warning signs before it's too late. How did you find these cases? Margaret pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Called a friend at Adult Protective Services. Asked about elder financial abuse cases involving adult children in Oakland County. These 3 popped up immediately. Adult Protective Services. I'd never heard of them before this nightmare started. Now they were investigating my son like he was a repeat offender. What connects them to Danny and Lisa? Lisa's cousin at the bank. He processed fraudulent documents for all 4 cases, yours and these 3. Same notary signatures, same witness names, same procedural shortcuts. Lisa's cousin. The quiet man from the family barbecue who helped families manage their finances. He'd been enabling family fraud across multiple counties, providing professional cover for systematic theft. The detective I spoke with estimates they've stolen over $400,000 from elderly parents in 18 months. Margaret's voice was grim. Your case broke it wide open because you kept such detailed records. $400,000. From people like me, widowed, grieving, trusting their children to help them navigate financial decisions during the worst time of their lives. Are the other families pressing charges? All 3. And now that there's a pattern, the prosecutor is treating this as organized fraud rather than individual family disputes. Organized fraud. My son wasn't just a criminal, he was part of a criminal organization that targeted elderly parents for systematic theft. How many people could they have hurt if no one had spoken up? Sometimes one person's courage saves dozens of others. The best part, Margaret said with satisfaction, is that Lisa's cousin kept detailed records. Bank employees have to document everything. His files will prove the entire operation. The detective's words hit like ice water. We estimate they've stolen over $400,000 from elderly parents in 18 months. Your case broke it wide open. The reporter asked me to repeat the dollar amount. When I said $400,000, she stopped writing and just stared. Ma'am, did you say $400,000? I nodded, sitting in Margaret's living room with cameras pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chin, had called after the police issued their press release about the fraud ring. Apparently, my son and Lisa had made the news. That's just from the families we know about, I said. Detective Morrison thinks there might be more. Jessica leaned forward. Can you walk us through how this started? I told her about the lease. About working 3 jobs to pay rent to my own son. About finding the forged documents in the attic. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was telling someone else's story. What was the hardest part? Realizing that the people you love most can hurt you the worst, I said. I kept thinking there had to be some explanation. Some misunderstanding. Even when I was staring at proof of their lies. The cameraman adjusted his equipment. Jessica checked her notes. Your son and daughter-in-law have been arrested on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. How does that make you feel? How did it make me feel? Empty. Relieved. Guilty. Angry. Like I'd won and lost at the same time. I feel sad, I said finally. Sad that it came to this. But also, free. For the first time in years, I don't have to pretend everything is okay. When crimes hide in families, media exposure saves future victims. Subscribe, truth deserves witnesses. After the interview, Margaret made tea while I sat on her couch, exhausted. The reporter had asked if I regretted going public. No, I'd told her. If my story keeps one other parent from getting taken advantage of, it's worth the embarrassment. But sitting there afterward, I wondered about Danny. Was he watching the news? Did he understand what he'd done to me? Or was he just angry that he got caught? The phone started ringing that evening. Reporters from 3 other stations wanted interviews. The story was spreading faster than I'd expected. $400,000 stolen from elderly parents, the evening news anchor said. The suspects, a local couple, allegedly targeted vulnerable family members in an elaborate fraud scheme. They showed Danny's mugshot on screen. My little boy, now 43 years old, staring at a police camera with dead eyes. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, celebrated every birthday and graduation. How do you mourn someone who's still alive? Media attention can feel invasive, but sometimes it's the only way to stop predators. Would you go public to save others? Margaret found me crying in her kitchen later that night. It had to be done, she said, rubbing my shoulder. The news segment aired Wednesday at 6 p.m. By Thursday morning, 7 more families had called the police with identical stories. Guilty on all counts. The judge's voice was steady, but I was shaking. Justice tastes different than I expected, less sweet, more exhausting. Danny sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, 20 feet away from me but feeling like miles. He didn't look at me during the verdict. Hadn't looked at me once during the entire 2-week trial. Lisa cried when they read her sentence. 3 to 5 years in state prison, plus restitution. Danny got 4 to 6 years because he was considered the ringleader. The mastermind. My son, the mastermind of stealing from elderly parents. Mrs. Patterson, the judge said, would you like to read your victim impact statement? I stood up slowly. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice was clear. Your Honor, I raised that man. Changed his diapers, stayed up all night when he had fevers, worked 2 jobs to pay for his college. I taught him right from wrong, or at least I thought I did. I looked at Danny then. Finally, he looked back. What you did to me wasn't just theft. It was murder, the murder of trust, of family, of everything I thought I knew about love. You turned me into your tenant, your employee, your victim. But worse than that, you made me doubt myself. Made me think I was crazy, paranoid, ungrateful. My voice cracked, but I kept going. I forgive you, because that's what mothers do. But I'll never trust you again. And that's the real punishment, not prison, but knowing you destroyed the one person who loved you unconditionally. Danny was crying now. Too late for tears. Justice delayed is justice denied. Subscribe, learn how legal systems really work when you need them most. The restitution hearing was scheduled for the following month. The prosecutor said I'd likely recover about 60% of what they'd stolen, maybe 70% if they sold their house and cars. Their house. The one I'd helped buy with my money. After the sentencing, I walked outside into crisp October air. Margaret waited by her car, ready to drive me home. Home to my small apartment, where I paid my own rent and answered to nobody. How do you feel? She asked. Tired, I said. Really, really tired. The reporters were waiting in the parking lot, but I'd said enough. Let the court records speak for themselves. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, and opened a bottle of wine Margaret had brought to celebrate. Celebrate felt like the wrong word, but closure felt right. Is legal victory worth destroying your family? Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. Around 9 p.m., someone slipped an envelope under my door. Inside, a handwritten note in Danny's careful script. Mom, I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but I don't have better words. I love you. I'm sorry. Restitution would take years, but that wasn't the surprise. The surprise was the apology letter slipped under my hotel room door that night. The apartment was small, but the lease was in my name only. For the first time in 2 years, I was nobody's tenant, I was home. 800 square feet of freedom. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for a table and 2 chairs. But every inch belonged to me, paid for with money I'd earned honestly, no strings attached. The restitution payment started coming in March, $500 a month from Danny's prison wages, $200 from Lisa's work release program. It would take 15 years to get back what they'd stolen, but at least it was something. I kept one job. 3 mornings a week at Peterson's office complex. Not because I needed the money anymore, but because I liked the routine. Plus, Mrs. Peterson had been kind during the trial, letting me adjust my schedule for court appearances. You don't have to work if you don't want to, Margaret reminded me over coffee one Tuesday morning. I want to, I said. Sitting around feeling sorry for myself won't change anything. The therapy helped. Dr. Rodriguez specialized in family trauma, which apparently was more common than I'd thought. An hour every other week, talking through the anger and guilt and complicated grief of losing your child to their own choices. It's okay to mourn him, she'd told me during our first session. Even though he's still alive, the son you thought you knew is gone. That deserves grieving. Recovery takes time, but independence is worth the wait. Subscribe. Sometimes the best chapters come after the worst ones. I started small traditions in my new life. Sunday morning grocery shopping, just for me. No calculating whether I could afford both milk and eggs. Friday night movies with Margaret, alternating who picked the film. Decorating for holidays again. My Christmas tree was tiny, but it was mine. The hardest adjustment was the quiet. No more Lisa's phone calls echoing through the house. No more Danny sports programs blasting from the living room. Just me, and the choices I wanted to make. I adopted a cat from the shelter in April. Orange Tabby, 12 years old, missing one eye from an old injury. The volunteers said senior cats were hard to place. What's his story? I asked. Previous owners surrendered him when they had a baby. Said he was too much work. I signed the adoption papers on the spot. His name was Chester, and he understood abandonment. Chester and I fell into a comfortable routine. He'd sit on my lap while I read, when I watched the morning news, follow me around the apartment like he couldn't believe someone actually wanted his company. Looks like we're both learning to trust again, I told him one evening. What does home really mean when family has betrayed you? Sometimes we have to build new definitions of safety. 6 months later, a knock at my door changed everything again. This time, it was a grandchild I'd never been allowed to meet. She had my eyes and her father's stubborn chin, but when she said, "Grandma," my heart cracked open in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Are you really my daddy's mommy? Emma was 8 years old, clutching a social worker's hand and staring at me like I was some kind of mythical creature. Which, I supposed, I was to her. Danny and Lisa had told her I was too sick to visit for her entire life. Yes, sweetheart. I'm your grandmother. The social worker, a tired-looking woman named Carol, explained the situation. Lisa's sister had gotten custody of Emma when her parents were arrested. But the sister was struggling, and Emma had been asking about me constantly since seeing me on the news. She calls you the grandma on TV, Carol said. Keeps asking why she never got to meet you. Good question. One I'd been asking myself for 8 years. Emma stepped closer, studying my face. You look different than on TV. Smaller. Television makes everyone look bigger, I said, crouching down to her eye level. What else did you want to know about me? Do you have any toys? I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in months. Not many. But I have a cat named Chester. Would you like to meet him? Her eyes lit up. Can I? Chester, as if sensing he was needed, appeared from the bedroom and rubbed against Emma's legs. She giggled and sat cross-legged on the floor, letting him climb into her lap. He likes me. He has good taste, I said. Family consequences ripple through generations. Subscribe. Some mistakes echo longer than we think. Carol and I talked quietly in the kitchen while Emma played with Chester. The situation was complicated. I could apply for visitation rights, but it would mean more court appearances, more lawyers, more dredging up the past. What does Emma know about what happened? I asked. She knows her parents made bad choices and hurt people. We've tried to keep it age-appropriate. She doesn't understand the details, just that they're in trouble and can't come home yet. I watched Emma through the doorway, whispering secrets to Chester like they were old friends. I don't want to confuse her more, I said. She's been through enough. Actually, Carol said, I think she needs you. Stability. Family connection. Someone who can tell her stories about her father before all this. Before he became a criminal. Before he chose money over family. Before he broke both our hearts. What if I can't be what she needs? What if you're exactly what she needs? Children pay the price for adult crimes. How do you protect innocence while pursuing justice? When it was time for Emma to leave, she hugged me tight around the waist. Will I see you again, Grandma? When she asked, why can't I visit Daddy anymore? I realized the consequences had circles I'd never considered. They asked me to speak at the senior center about financial fraud. I stood at the podium and said, the person who steals from you probably calls you Mom. The audience of 35 seniors went dead quiet. Then Mrs. Williams in the front row nodded slowly and said, Amen. It had been 18 months since Danny's conviction. Emma visited every other Saturday now, officially through the court system, but it felt natural. Like we'd always known each other. She'd started calling me Grandma Ruth, instead of just Grandma, which felt more real somehow. Family financial abuse is different from stranger fraud, I continued, looking out at faces that had lived long enough to understand betrayal. Strangers take your money. Family takes your faith in people. After my talk, at least a dozen people approached me with their own stories. Sons who'd emptied joint bank accounts. Daughters who'd forged power of attorney documents. Grandchildren who'd taken out credit cards in grandparents' names. I never reported it, whispered a woman named Helen. He's my only child. That's exactly why he knew he could get away with it, I told her gently. Margaret, who'd driven me to the speaking engagement, waited patiently while I talked to each person. Some wanted advice, others just wanted someone to listen. All of them carried the same burden I'd carried, the weight of loving someone who'd betrayed them. Your story matters. Subscribe, share your truth before someone needs to hear it. On the drive home, Margaret asked, do you regret any of it? Going to the police, the trial, all of it? I thought about Emma, who was spending the weekend with her aunt but would be back next Saturday for our usual routine, pancakes, cartoons, and Chester demanding attention. I thought about my small apartment, my independence, my ability to sleep without counting money. I thought about Danny, who'd been transferred to a minimum security facility and would be eligible for parole in 18 months. He wrote letters sometimes, apologies that felt rehearsed, promises that felt empty. I read them but didn't respond. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. I regret that it had to happen, but I don't regret fighting back. That evening, Emma called to say goodnight, a tradition we'd started after her third visit. Grandma Ruth, will you tell me about Daddy when he was little? I'd been dreading this question for months, but the answer came easily. He was curious about everything. Always asking why and how. He built the most amazing fort in our backyard one summer, complete with a flag he'd made from an old bedsheet. What happened to the fort? Winter came, I said. Sometimes good things don't last forever, but that doesn't mean they weren't worth building. What would you tell someone facing family financial abuse right now? Drop your advice below, it might save someone's future. I keep the apartment keys on a simple ring now. Not because I don't trust anyone, but because I finally trust myself. The story isn't about what they took, it's about what I found when I decided to fight back.